are literally shaping the planet.
Purpose is the only pathway to a regenerative future.
We have a choice to stay with the status quo or to change.
What is the point of trying to be just resilient when we can actually innovate?
So my name, as she said, is Dafna Kaplan. I have sort of a career history that is not really a straight line, but I think that's pretty common for this sector. I spent the first 10 years of my career in the product and tech sector, and product around tech sector. Probably the most influential pieces of that for me long-term were sort of an awakening before the Michael Graves for Target days of good design does not have to be expensive. That is something that made a deep impression on me as I worked for a very successful entrepreneurial company founded by Art Center graduates. And the second was I spent some time doing automotive tech, or in a company that did automotive tech for about 9 out of 10 of the top automotive manufacturers, many of which were in Japan at the time. And so a healthy respect for what it takes for a factory to be successful and the economics that drive a factory. And a lot of that really informed how I've looked at this sector over the years as it's evolved. That's this sector, meaning the construction tech sector. And then the last 16 years of my career have been in the building sector, first for a high-end modern architect, and then predominantly most of that time has been working for a very large regional general contractor that was known for and specialized in delivering very complex projects with certainty. And what I mean by that is like the Broad Museum or the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. So projects that had a lot of one-off elements that had never been done before, and figuring out a way to figure those out before you started working on them so that you could deliver them with some certainty. So both of those things those are the takeaways that have most influenced the way I came into the industrialized construction sector. All right, so with that, okay, I have made a promise to talk about the ecosystem, and that is what I will do. Let's see if I can get the slide to advance. Okay, so for anyone who's in this sector already, it's probably the chart on the right is the one that people are fixated on, which is essentially that construction is near dead last with respect to productivity gains in the last 50 years. Up at the top is manufacturing, hence a lot of the focus to recapture what McKinsey says that market would be worth if we just caught up to the average. Meaning if construction could just have gained the productivity that the average industry had gained over the last 50 years, it would be worth about, $1.6 trillion a year. So there's a lot of effort to capture that. And a lot of the effort, both in terms of investment, but also in terms of just innovation or attempted innovation, is around the industrialization sector, meaning productizing what an industry that has been a service for hundreds of years and trying to make it achieve the gains of productization, so to speak, industrialization. So volumetric modular is one on the spectrum, and it's one that Cassette is launched with. And so these are a couple of our products just to show you what that means. The one on the left is a hotel product. The one on the right is a school classroom. And so when I say why is it important, I'm not actually talking about what I just said, which may or may not be very important. I mean actually the photo that's in front of you. I'm curious if folks in this room know why showing an image of an automotive factory might be important in this discussion. Any thoughts, Q&A? If not, I'll tell you what I often hear, and even I would say where I started in my whole journey a couple of years ago when I traveled to Sekisui Heim, Sekisui House, some of the oldest and most successful modular companies in the world that produce modular houses somewhat similar to how cars are produced. So it's taken them 40 years to get there, but a lot of what gets focused on when people talk about the building industry transforming like the automotive industry is they talk about the mass customization and the ability to produce that product fast with 80 different options, et cetera. And so there's a big focus on the what, where we want to get to, but I think it is completely the wrong focus, and I'll tell you why. This is what I think we should focus on, which is the Japanese characters for Kaizen. Toyota made this phrase famous. It is essentially translated to process improvement. And so my hypothesis with this talk and with our entire company and the venture that I've done is that actually the thing about that factory that is most important for us at this early stage of industrialization of construction is the discipline and practice of process improvement. So, and the reason I say that is I think we've spent a lot of time as an industry, meaning those who are trying to productize construction, answering questions like, okay, how much of this am I allowed to change? It's the first question an architect asks. It's the first question a developer asks. How much of this can I change? You would never ask that if you were buying a product. Automotive, I mean, it's pretty clearly delineated, but the product has been refined over many years of process improvement for that product to do what it needs to do and through a continuous feedback loop with customers. But it is still a product and it is still driven by the economics of a factory. So what I encourage is this willingness to go back to the basics when it comes to understanding if construction is to be a product. If we are to industrialize, are we willing to take a step back in terms of what those building blocks are? And building blocks not only meaning the product itself, but sort of what it can do and what the process looks like. It's not going to be for every project or every building that this works, but maybe we can start establishing products that work at a very repetitive level for very repetitive buildings, and pretty soon we can make spaceships. So when this works, it's magical. And if you don't believe process improvement is what to focus on, I'm going to try to prove it to you in a minute. But the reason this is important is that if you were to go around, say, the US and talk to every modular manufacturer, and I have, talked to as many real estate developers or architects or participants, general contractors who have gone through a volumetric modular, significantly prefabricated project and got to the end of that. What they would say contributed to that project either being this game-changing win. They saw this 30% savings in the schedule, which is massive. We haven't seen that in 50 years, right? Or to it being an epic failure, which is more what you hear about, unfortunately, probably because people like to talk about failure. That success and failure and the points that have driven that success and failure have never come down to the technology and never come down to the product itself. So it's not to say that the products are not, it's not to say that a great product or a great idea of how it comes together is not important, or a great software for direct to manufacturing fabrication is not important. It is just that that is actually not what drives the magnitude improvement. It is the process innovation, the simple, beautiful, elegant process you see on this often used image of parallel processing two parts of that path to shorten the duration. But what looks so simple is wildly elusive, and it is not as simple as it looks. It is not easy. It is why we need to focus on a reorientation and process improvement. And I'll explain why. So there were not enough bubbles on this chart in the last couple of weeks for me to start populating. And very quickly, I learned that I couldn't fit all of the chaos of our existing ecosystem into that chart. And so I started to draw my own. And I thought this would take me weeks. And so you get the point. It's essentially to say this construction and the way it gets delivered in most countries, especially in the US, is a very complex system. And in complex system theory, that's essentially what it speaks to is that there are a lot of symbiotic and interdependent relationships across the spectrum that talk to one another and influence one another. It's not linear. So if you make a great innovation in this ecosystem, it is not enough for you to only address that innovation and how it affects one party. It is going to affect a lot of other pieces of the delivery chain. And the more game-changing that innovation, the more disruptive, if you will, that is. Disruptive can be a good thing, but it also creates winners and losers. Winners and losers also creates resistance. In a complex ecosystem, resistance it's a number one block to the innovations that are coming out. So given that, and given the ecosystem that we live in and that some of you are a part of, what would you solve for? If it's my money that I'm putting in, and it is, my money all day long is going to go on actually aligning that process, because we know as a society and we know as a commercial culture how to do product. Why are we continuing to try to reinvent what a product is every time we do a new project? What we don't know how to do is actually take the gains of industrialization and absorb them into this complex ecosystem. And so the work of our company is really focused on how do you actually facilitate that ecosystem adoption of industrialization. So I love me a good technology. I'm from the tech industry. I love great design. I love, yes, let's build the next kit of parts of Sears home. But it will not make the game-changing impact that we all want unless you're willing to do this across the ecosystem. So probably one of the most influential books in our thinking or the influential authors is Richard Thaler, the father of a very new theory of economics, which essentially says, and the books to read would be Nudge or Misbehaving. And it's called Misbehaving essentially because theory of economics, where people do things where marginal gain is greater than marginal cost, do not apply to human behavior. We do not always do what is rational. And someone asked for a copy of the deck. Yes, absolutely. We'll send it out, or Emily, we send it after the talk. So one of the principles that's probably most important for this conversation in behavioral economics is loss aversion. And it essentially came out of a study that was done in 1992, where I said to you, if I flip this coin and tails, you lose $10. How much would I have to give you for heads if you were to make that same bet? And on average, someone wanted the gain. The gain had to be twice the loss. So essentially, you had to give me $20 if I was going to take that gamble. So this is really important. If you're going to bring some innovation into this industry that is going to affect one party or multiple parties, is to think about not selling them on what this time savings is, but the gain needs to be worth to them at least twice as much as the risk, the perceived risk. So my humble opinion and my 2 cents about what does that mean is really taking the time to understand how is that innovation going to impact everyone in the way a building is getting delivered today. There are models where you just completely ignore the millions of people that are currently delivering buildings, but you can't ignore the customer, and they are one of the people that has to make the behavior change. And so the complete vertical integration model, for me at least, is there's a fatal flaw that doesn't understand that a lot of the behavior changes come at the very front end on the finance side. A bank not behaving the way they do in construction lending, but behaving differently, as in business lending or manufacturing. A client not making a decision like they would construction, where they're hard bidding and competing people against each other, but actually fundamentally shifting that process for certainty of product. So vertically integrating does not solve that problem at the front end of that chain. And so I argue that I think the most powerful thing we can do is use, again, another behavioral economics principle, which is social norms, which is find a few people, a few strategic partners willing to go on this adventure with you. Create a system of change within the industry, and they will carry that forward with you. The notion of being proprietary about your innovation is not going to work in an industry where you are going to need partners and collaboration. So this is very hard stuff to do. The encouragement I would also give you, I was in the laptop industry when that industry was growing in double digits year over year for 20 years. You know, share a little bit. Everybody is going to win when an industry is that fast. And so you don't need to capture all the value yourself. Really think about open sourcing a little bit and sharing with a powerful group of strategic partners, or even the entire industry. I mean, how we like to think is more broadly, like how do we actually share more, educate more, make it easy for more people to do this and perceive the risk lower and the gains higher. So really quick in volumetric modular, I mean, the risks are very clear. There's such a low standard, even though it seems that it should be a very clear delineation of scope between, say, the site GC and what in many cases is a box factory. It's actually not. And different supply chain solutions right now are requiring different ways of integrating, different ways of delivering. The design has flexibility with some manufacturers, less with others. Tremendous impact on the ecosystem when they can't count on the same thing every time. And so the more you can sort of curb that risk, and in the general contractor community, risk is expensive. So if you are not defining that scope really clearly for the subs that are on site, they put a number in there called contingency, and it's essentially a buffer on their number. And if you add that buffer down the chain, things get more expensive, things get messy, and at the end, really you just get less adoption. So, and because of what we found earlier, which is that the game-changing impact of industrialization largely is due to process, I would postulate that anything you do, whether you're making software for direct manufacturing, whether you are making volumetric modular or a sub-assembly or some other product, everything about the design of that product should be tied to the feedback loop of how it affected the installation or how it affected the process with everything else that had to happen on the chain, how the way you're delivering that product affected the finance team. So everything is subservient to the thing that actually makes this successful for the customer at the end of the day. So thank you. This is my fabulous leadership team. This is our team and a beautiful project that they've done for the Winter Olympics in 2018. And I will take any questions that you might have if there's time. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. There's definitely time. So
okay.
We've got a few extra minutes for any questions. And sometimes it takes people a minute to type questions. So we can sit for a moment. And I know there's also some conversations going on in Slack. So if you do have a question later on, you can direct those in Slack as well.
So I'll just blab while we're waiting for questions. I apologize for this drab room I'm in. I don't have a whole great bookshelf Zoom background. I'm actually in a business office in a Korean hotel at 3 in the morning.
We definitely appreciate you joining us. And sacrificing sleep.
I did not have this trip planned at the time, but we were ahead of schedule and installing a project, and I wanted to get over here before it was done. All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, here we go. How do you see the modular prefab market? How do you see the modular and prefab market growing in the US compared to other places like Japan? Are companies battling for market traction? I'm assuming you mean in other countries, but I'll address, I guess, both things. So largely the areas that modular and prefab has been successful from an adoption standpoint, it has really been driven by the regulatory community. And in most cases, that's by an incentivization, meaning, you know, a government incentivizing a developer or builder to use modularization, either by expediting a project or giving other incentives to that project, or in the case of Singapore, which is probably the farthest ahead in terms of adoption, it's simply a mandate. And for them, it was actually an issue of out of control immigration, because a lot of the issues and a lot of the things that I haven't shown you that have driven industrialization have been a perpetual shrinking of the labor force, the traditional labor force, over the last 4 decades. And this shrinking of the labor force is also contributing to that escalation in construction costs. So what it does for countries like Singapore that are small is it brings a mass influx of immigrants, which creates other issues for the country. And so those countries that either by incentive or by mandate essentially make it easier for you are having a lot more good fortune. And even in our own country, I think the state of New York has really incentivized modular. And so they are at something like 8% of multifamily construction going modular, the West Coast at about 0.5% or 1% at this point. And so there's been that acceleration. And in terms of battling for market share, you know, if you are battling for market share in this industry, I would argue that you're focused on the wrong thing. The demand is so far greater and the interest is so far greater than the ability of the industry to meet that demand or execute on it. That given the numbers I gave you, in the US, it's about 3% of multifamilies delivered modular. And you think of the size of this industry, I don't have it in front of me, construction's like an $11 trillion industry around the world. And even just pick one sector of industrialization, like multifamily housing, it's a very big number. And so if we gain 1% of that as an industry, there is a lot of food for plenty to eat. So I would argue there is not really a fight for market share. There's really, the struggles in modular and prefab are much more around, we're much more fighting against status quo. We're fighting against somebody wanting to take the risk and just building the way they've always been built. Things have been built. If we collaborate, this is an argument for standardization. If we make it easier industry-wide for adoption, standardize how things come out to the corridor, if we make those things easier across the chain and are a little less proprietary, you know, sort of like when Tesla open sourced their technology to get more electric manufacturers to start building cars so that costs would come down in his industry. It's sort of similar. Like if we could break those barriers down together, the industry is going to grow as a percentage of construction overall. So, and that would be across the board. So, sorry, that was a lot on one question. What is the biggest impact of modular construction on design firms and the construction documents they're delivering? Excellent question. We just had this conversation yesterday. There are some in this industry who don't understand why you will even need architects. I am not one of them. I'm getting a beautiful award from the AIA this month. And so part of the reason for that is that I tend to think, again, if the disruption is really transformative, there should be a place for anyone who wants to be at the table. There should be a place in the new ecosystem for that talent and skill set. It just might not be in the same place. So depending on how the industry consolidates, et cetera, I think if we productize the way products should be made, there will be less choice around modifying the product. And architects will perhaps say in a modular universe, or an architect will have to choose. Do I want to be the architect that's designing the building and the siding and say the facade treatment or essentially the exterior architecture of the building? Or do I want to design what's in the living space or the module or whatever that is? If I want to design what's in the product, I'm going to go work for a product company. So I think there is going to be way more ambiguity and overlap between industrialized or industrial designers. Sorry, it's 3 a.m, so I'm losing my words. Industrial designers, architecture, environmental design. I think that we, in many ways, have the wrong people in the room, and we have them siloed. So I think those things will overlap. You will either be a part of a product company as an architect, or you will be a part of sort of an infrastructure side of that, because construction will never be a 100% product. It is always going to be a hybrid. And there's always going to, and this is why the process is so important. And this is why it's so different from automotive. We need a product that serves process in this industry, because it's more like if I were to sell, it's more like the way complex software is sold. Salesforce, for instance, is a module. It is a product they've developed in modules. It is sold in modules. They make a profit in modules. You wouldn't sell Salesforce into a complex IT environment like Disney without a 6-month implementation plan, without a team that actually goes in to help implement that, and then help integrate it with all of the other software in that company. And the same is true for a well-executed prefabricated or industrialized product from our standpoint. So we make the box, so we're a box factory, you could say, but we are going to sell you that box without everything it takes to make it successful, from the design integration plan, working with the site architect, to the delivery, everything up through the installation and connection of that item. So the customer is not interested in buying the thing, they're interested in the whole picture of design, project success, cost certainty. So I don't know that I've answered that question. I think the role of the architect is changing. The impact to your life, if you stay outside of the product world, in the architect world, is to really understand the tools and understand the new alignment of your design deliverables. Because for me to do shop drawings, if I'm a modular manufacturer that allows customization of every product, I'm not so sure Cassette is necessarily the right product for you in that situation. But if you are, say, using a typical module the way they're done today, you're going to have to get those CDs done probably long before you're submitting your permit set. There's just a few. That just touches on a whole other conversation. That would be a whole other hour, so I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole. Oh, so I think we're at 30 minutes, Kayla. Is that?
Yeah, we were right at time, so perfect timing. And feel free, anyone, to continue this conversation in the Slack channel. Thank you so much, Dafna, for your time today.
You're so welcome. And how should I get the deck out to you, or do you want to distribute it?
Yeah, I will get with you right after this. We're going to share that in the Slack channel. There's some people in there who are waiting on that, so I will get with you right after.
Super. Okay.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Enjoy the conference. Bye-bye.